You're on. You went. You're on.
So in Ayin Beis, Volume 1, Discourse 3, Chapter 13. So to sum up, the last chapter was 12, it was a little dense. But as the Rebbe Shabbat is doing now, he's laying out the map, the cosmic map, the DNA of all of existence. Because to understand and appreciate how existence can lift itself up to a higher state of consciousness, to a transcendent state that somewhat weakens the ego and allows each of us, allows the entire world to become more sublime, we have to first understand, so to speak, the enemy. We have to understand what we're made of, and how we're structured. Because to suggest a remedy of how to transform something, you have to understand what that something is. So this is a lengthy discussion of what we are. And essentially what we are not one-dimensional. We're energy within containers. Energies within containers. If we were just containers, an argument could be made, that's it. We're static and we're stuck in the way we've been created. How can any system change itself, as Einstein says? But since there's energy within the containers, or what we would call a soul inside of a body, energy to be released. So even from a technological point of view, human progress is based on that there's always more potential. If the earth and nature was exactly as we see it, and there'd be nothing to tap into. If God created the world as, here's what you see is what you get, that's it. But God created a very multi-layered world. Science, technology, study, examination, probing, the heavens, the earth, nature, every creature teaches us there are layers and layers and layers. And then we tap into it and we improve our lives. We access the energy. We dig deep beneath the ground and we find fossil fuels. We're able to split an atom. We discover the quantum reality of subatomic physics, genes, chromosomes, DNA. And then we learn to manipulate them or to work with them or in some way to help, and through that, some way to alter and improve our state of lives. Communications. This is all because embedded in existence is energy. So in simple English, that concept of energy in containers is really a world, a universe that has always potential. You meet somebody and they say, well, I made mistakes in my life. I did this, I did that. The answer is, well, you have a soul. You have more potential. Even if you did good, there's always better to do. So we have layers and layers that we can access. So existence right away has built into it many layers. It's not airtight. It's not what you see is what you get. This is a practical way to explain energy in containers and its relevance to our lives. But still, as we're going to elaborate in this whole hemshech, in this whole series, is that this is a stepping stone to then come to a deeper level of energy, the energy within the containers. Then there's the energy beyond the containers, which is going to be ultimately chesed, in the interface that leads existence to a place that becomes divine. So not only are we tapping potential, but we're also able to reach something beyond potential, something that is beyond us. And this is the dance of the interface. So in a sense, you could say science helps reveal the energy within containers. Elokim. Science is essentially looking at the universe, understanding it, examining it, probing, and discovering that there's energy within everything, and then accessing it. But it's only Elokim, meaning science studies God's mind as it is embedded in creation and nature. So you want a communication tool, cell phone, computer microchips, all the different things that we have today, is tapping into the containers of this world where God placed them within it, concealed energy. So structure of existence, as I said, is not airtight. You can access that energy. What Ayin Beis comes to introduce is that through Torah, we have a nu hamshach, we have a transmission that brings in energy into the containers, into our existence, through the energy that's within the containers that comes from a greater and a higher place, without annihilating existence. And that's where the real, as I said, the fusion takes place. So that's an overview. I'm just explaining how this whole Hamshach is about understanding the energy within the containers where we're at now, which leads us to understand the energy outside of the containers, which really is the transcendence that we experience. So, for example, it's very basically put. You love somebody. As a result, you nurture them. It could be a child, it can be a spouse, it can be a friend. And the nurturing, it helps actualize their potential. Like a good education. So here was a potential, a person with a lot of great potential, and potential was actualized. It's one of the greatest pleasures in life to see a potential actualized, both personally and seeing in someone else. You see, the Rabbi did this. It took thousands of people. Who knows what would have happened with them had they not been motivated and inspired to go do something with their lives, instead of just taking care of themselves. For a tremendous potential. But that is the potential within you. That's like the energy, Eris Akela. That's the energy that you were born with, that can remain hidden and latent, or it can emerge. Or, even as much as potential emerges, there's always more. But then the question is, can we go beyond that? And that's, of course, a critical component. That we can go beyond because we can go into what's called the energy beyond the containers, either called Seva Kalam or chesed. And that's when we start connecting on God's terms. That not just our potential is realized, but also on God's terms. That God starts giving us something from His potential. And it's interesting, it's also legalis shlemus chesed. Those are one of the reasons given the creation of existence. God, in a sense, is actualizing His potential. We're getting into the discussion whether He has to do that in chesed. But the point is, there is such a reason, meaning there is something about the revelation. Obviously, it can't be the ultimate reason because God does not need to. His potential is as good as actual. It's like His word is as good as His check. But nevertheless, there's such an element. Ultimately, the purpose is derived, to make a dwelling, a divine home in the material world, the lowest of worlds. But I just wanted to explain this context a bit. So in the last chapter, which was, as I said, a bit dense, reviewing it again, look back a bit, it's all part of this picture. The Rebbe Rashab is laying out a very elaborate and comprehensive picture of how the structure works. So he's dissecting in detail the energy of the containers. So first he began with the containers, explaining how they come into being. They come through distance. They come in through concealment. Then he went to the energy. The energy, on the other hand, is connected to its source, its revelation. Connected to the kav. The kav is connected to the energy before the tzimtzum. These are all levels of how. And then he went the other way around in chapter 11, where he concluded and said, yeah, and yet the containers have something the energy doesn't have. Containers are not touched, so to speak, by the tzimtzum, so they're like a reminder of things. It's like almost, like the science that you find something that's a reminder of what's preserved from who knows when, exactly intact. So in a sense, the containers are preserved from prehistoric tzimtzum, before the tzimtzum, yet they're concealed. You can't understand what they are, like a relic, so to speak. You need the energy to reveal it. It would be like digging deep underground and finding something that was there, let's say, in Yerushalayim, finding something from the temple. But if you don't dig, it's lying there in darkness. So it's like a container that's there, and you need the energy, the light to reveal it. But it does have something, and the energy was affected by the tzimtzum. On the other hand, the energy, of course, is revelation. The energy reveals. Like we said, we're talking about actualizing potential. That Kalim have potential is beautiful. But the actualizing is another story. Like when the Alter Rebbe told that the chesed who said, he demanded from him he should learn more. She says, Rebbe, she should be a lamdan. That's what he demands. So they said, Rebbe, I have a good head. I can become a lamdan anytime I want. And the Alter Rebbe said, just like a ganav, a thief is not someone who could be a thief, but is one who's a thief. So a lamdan is not someone who could be a lamdan, but someone who is a lamdan. Now with a thief, it's very clear. Everybody could be a thief. But that's not an issue. That's not a prohibition that you could be a thief. The Torah says you shouldn't be one, not that you couldn't be one. In other words, you can't get rid of the potential, in this world at least. So the same thing in Lamdan, to just say I could be, is meaningless. Of course it could be. It could be it could be the worst, it could be the best. It's actualizing. That's relevant. It's so actualized. It's like someone says, I could give a lot of tzedakah. Yeah, it's very sweet, but it doesn't help anyone. So, you'd rather have someone who give a little and maybe can't give so much than someone who can give a lot and doesn't give anything, obviously. But the point is, okay, so now in chapter 12, went into essentially a question and beginning of an answer. Now it goes the other way around. After establishing that container is basically identity, and energy is essentially amorphous, or it's called transcendental, shapeless, when you really break it down, you have to say that also the energy also has some shape, which really is helping us understand, number one, the structure. Remember, everything is dual here. You understand the structure better, you understand how to transcend the structure, how to elevate it. So this helps us understand the structure better because you understand how energy and containers are tailored for each other. And number two, what's going to end up happening? It's going to help us also understand how we're not stuck in the container level, and the energy is not airtight. Since the energy is shaped like the container, so the energy becomes an excellent interface between container and that which is beyond energy. Because energy, so here we're talking about Atzilus as being interface. Ultimately, we're going to talk about chesed being the interface. Then we're going to talk about chokhmah stima being the interface. Now, in a way, the energy is the interface. Because on one hand, it's it comes from the kav and lifnei tzimtzum. On the other hand, it has shape and form to some extent, so it fits in the containers. So it's another. If for example, was pshittis, he doesn't say this in this chapter specifically, but it's implied, and later for sure this is the undercurrent. If is pashut, which is beautiful, then it would be like very divine. Then it would be lacking its relationship with us. So I'll give you an example. Water, we know originates, is rooted in chesed, in love. Fire is rooted in in gevurah. That's why the colors, white is blue, red, fire rises, water descends, love gives, fire fire and water expands, fire contracts things. When something burns, it gets all. But bottom line is that water in Elam Hazeh, its spiritual root is chesed. The question now is like this: when we take a cup of water and make a blessing on it, or we use it on the mizbeach in the altar, or in some other way we use it for something holy, mitzvah, what happens here? Does the water get transformed, or the water was just a container, and now that it's being used for a divine purpose, that's the divine energy that comes out of it is what's relevant? Or is the water itself being permeated with this kedusha? So this is in the letters of Atzilus of Nigla, and the words of Nigla, is it become a chefze shel kedusha, or chefze shel mitzvah, tashmish mitzvah, right? Tashmish mitzvah, tashmish kedusha, or it's incidental. And you could make an argument that Elam Hazeh physically is just a prusdut, it's just a corridor to get to a higher spiritual place, which is Elam Haba, future, the next world. The Rambam, says Elam Haba is the word that comes after meaning the schar as a result of what we do here. Many Jews have this attitude, actually, philosophically. This world, as we sing, is a small little bridge. What is it called? Yesher Tzar Ma'ed. Yeah, right. And the Rambam, actually, his opinion is ultimate schar is not souls and bodies, because a body is inferior to a soul. So you have to give the body something for it because it participated. Like the Talmud Gemara says, it's like a lame person and a blind person. You put them together. But ultimately, true divine reward, Ziv Ashchina, Nanim Ziv Ashchina, to appreciate the divine is a soulful experience. Yet Chassidus and Kabbalah paskins like the Ramban that ultimate rewards Tchis HaMesim in bodies. What does that mean? That we actually dictates. No. The water itself is relevant here. Or else God doesn't need revelation in Atzilus and higher than Atzilus. The whole point is that the material world should be refined. That even in the darkest of places where there's no revelation, there should be revelation. So not just you're making a blessing on the water and it's used and now so-called you can discard the concept of water.
No, there should be revelation, but
maybe
not transformation.
That's just, let me just, yeah, that's what I'm saying. But revelation, I meant into the container, in the parameters of the container, which then can transform it. So now, if you say the energy is pashut, is shapeless, and like the mashal of the paradise example, that the energy doesn't have any colors, but you put it in different tubes or glasses, colored glasses, so it looks red, blue, green. So that's just the art apparently, the energy. But if you say the energy itself has something that's blue and green, not quite like the container has it, but in some fashion, you're making another connection that the energy can speak to the containers. They speak to each other. I mean, example in chinuch would be, in education, a teacher, he goes down to the student's level, explains it. But the goal is really for the teacher to get his ideas expressed. Or you're transforming, first revealing into the containers of the student, and the student himself or herself can become the level of the teacher. It's a whole different story. And then the energy, if the educator, then the energy of the educator has to be tailored to the container. If it's not tailored, he may explain it, but it'll be more like a student will become wow in awe. I'll appreciate what you said, but can I do what you're doing? It's a difference. Stand on your own feet. Or shall have a flame that rises on its own. That requires a much more patient and what's the word for it? Much more diligent and engaging. Yeah, where the energy has to engage with the container and they speak to each other. The student comes back. How do I solve this? And slowly they acclimate themselves to one another. So to go back to the chapter, I know we're going off a little because this is relevant to the whole picture. So when he makes the case here is like this, that you have to say, because it says, so chachma also is not just the container. Also the energy has a certain distance from the divine. In the fact, the question is how. We just said the energy is similar, close, connected to the kav, and therefore blima doesn't have substance. So if you they're not beinarech. They have, and therefore he goes on and says, you have to say that also the energy is not complete pshitus. So basically the discussion, chapter Beis, you could say is what is pshitus mamish, or bligvul mamish, that's the word he uses, or not mamish. Because you could ask the question, what does that mean? Either it's infinite or it's not infinite. It's literally infinite or almost infinite. Is there such thing as almost infinite? It's like, what we call it, malikat l'kol, malikat l'palga. You can't, for example, God forbid the negative, you can't kill somebody halfway, either they're dead or they're alive. In the positive sense, what does that mean? But clearly, in our world, we can't find examples for that. Tables either finite or it's infinite. But when talking about the divine, which is beyond even infinite, there can be levels. What are the levels? So I explained it once here with the numbers, just to give an example of levels of Ein Arech. You could have the infinite set of numbers is absolutely infinitely distant from any single number. And 1 in a trillion, or trillion are equal, or let's say equally distant from infinite. It's not like you get closer to infinity. The infinite number always remains beyond 1 or trillion, because a trillion is, at the end of the day, is a trillion once. Okay. So like we said, the expression, Yeshim Hashem Arech Atzilus from Bria from Atzilus, as Atzilus is Ein Arech from Ein Sof, which basically means, Rabbi Hillel said, there's a distance as a cat is from me. I'm the more distant from the Rebbe, which is just to give you a tangible example. And we think of this, a cat and a human being. But what does this mean? It means the following. How could you say 2 levels of distance? Because in Atzilus, Bria exists. It's just not Atzilus. The real Ein Arech, Atzilus and Bria are both equally irrelevant, so to speak, or inconsequential. From the point of perspective of infinity, 1,000,001,000,000 are the same, because they're both single finite units. One is a lot of finite units, one is one finite unit. But it still recognizes it's a set of numbers. We're all numbers. We're all apples. We're all oranges. But take an example, real infinity that doesn't not forget about infinite set of numbers. The concept of bli gvul in general, not numbers. So then, even what you are is not valuable. What does that mean? What's lacking in a trillion and a single from the perspective of infinity is that you're not infinite. But what you are, I cannot disqualify. You're a number like I'm a number. I'm not infinite number, but we value it like mathematics. The infinity symbol of infinity is necessary in equations, infinity, and then there's finite set of numbers. However, those two interact. Again, they'll never meet. They're absolutely distant, but they're all numbers. Whereas when you talk about something that doesn't even recognize numbers, who says number has a value? So it's not just what you're lacking. Even what you are has no tfisis makom, has no real value. Later he speaks about this Ein Arech in different terms. So when you talk about Atzmus or God, you're not talking about, like I'm different. I said it yesterday also. I'm so far from you, you don't come close to me. He's so far that he can be close to you and not close to you. It makes no difference. Because even what you are has not tefus makom. It's not just what you're lacking. Anyway, to go back to this, so he makes the case, therefore, that is also Ein Arech. What does this mean? So you have to say, he says, that also has some shape. And briefly, he spoke from Atik and Akudim, and then goes into the logic of it. That the emes, after proving that there is Kalim, because, even energy has 10 spheres in it, because we see in Atik and in Akudim, that essentially you have to say, since the energy enters the containers, which we began, this is in the middle of the page. The emes, im ha'eres b'chinas bli gvul mamash lo yehav sheli is kalal slapshus eres b'kel. Remember again, when we say it cannot be, it means from our perspective. From God's perspective, anything can be. You could measure the ark in the Holy of Holies, and it's measured as an ark. Then you measure from wall to wall, and there's as if nothing is there. So we're not talking about that. That's one place in the universe where God manifests nimna noise, possibility to do everything. We're talking about from a logical perspective, a structural perspective. For a bli gvul to enter a gvul is an impossibility. As he said, it's muskin. That's not possible. So just the mere fact that Eris enter into containers. So let's put it in physical terms, in the human body. The fact that your eyes can see, you have to say even the power of vision, not just the container, has some shape and form. Clearly not physical shape and form. Clearly not in any way that we can measure, but it's still measurable. It's what, let's say, it's chesed, not gevurah. It's the power of sight, not the power of hearing.
Because it's drawn to the eyes, to the physical eye.
Yeah, and drawn also, it's tailored to that. Yeah, exactly. Now, if you looked in the soul, you're not going to find a thing called koyach, the power to see, just like you're not going to find the power of other things. Because the soul is just an amorphous force that has much potential in it. But from the result, you realize.
But that part of the soul, that's koyach is drawn to the eye. That part of the soul.
It's almost like what the Rebbe said in the Sikha Sheftim, that the Sheftim Jesus says, Vashiva Shaftaichla V'Kivashena V'Yitzayich Kivatchila. What's the difference in a Shefet and a Yayitz? So Shefet is a judge. He's a Rav. You go to him for a ruling, authority. Asay L'Charav. But then there's Knei L'Chachaver. A yayitz, an advisor, is more of a friend. He's giving you advice, he's consulting, not giving you a ruling. You need both. So if you have a person who's just a shafet, you have distance. They'll give you a ruling, but there's no relationship. It's not meeting keli. It's dictating to the keli. This is what you do. When you say that a rebbe, or you say someone's also a yayitz, means he also comes on my terms. It's a whole different level of interaction. So you really need both. I'm just giving an example because I relate to the example because because it means that that person is a yayitz, advisor will manifest, a rav, and to know the situation, but he doesn't have to understand all your feelings about it and how you should work on your end. An advisor goes more to your terms. It's like the terms they say Moshe and Aaron. Shushbina de Matanis and Shushbina de Malka. So Moshe was the Torah, voice of Torah, what God wants. Aaron was the friend. He would go Shalom Bayis, he would talk to them, understand the situation. You really need both. But the second one, the one that understands the situation, is like being mislabish in the containers. He actually sits and listens and works it through and stuff like that. So bottom line is, okay, the Esha and the Keli. And then he continues on. Okay, so the Kelim is for sure a form of Gvul, because clearly they have some shape and form, like it says in Tikkun Zeh Kama Gufin. And the Eres therefore have to also have some form of, they can be completely Gvul. Then he continues and explains it, according to what it says elsewhere, that the Kelim are Keicha Gvul, not Gvul Mamish, the power to create the finite. But at the end of the day, that too has to affect and affects the iris, the energy, that it too cooperates with that, and as such has some form of Hagbolah. So he says it in two ways. Number one, it's chesed, not gevurah. However you twist and turn it, whether it's actual chesed and gevurah, or the power of chesed and gevurah, but it's chesed, not the power of chesed, not the power of gevurah. And the second thing, that means it's a net seer, even if it's ein safely pashtus, and even if it's unlimited chesed or unlimited gevurah, but it's chesed, not gevurah. And the second thing is that the keicha gvul actually limits the flow. It's not ein safely pashtus. In Atzilus, do what you want. You have no limits. But outside of Atzilus, that's where there's a boundary. So that right away means that even the air, even before it has something, like he says, you have to say, even though they technically are insiflis pashtusa, nevertheless they're being stopped from flowing outward. So is it really insiflis pashtusa? It means that they potentially can go anywhere. But the bottom line is there's a line. Like God made the boundary between the sea and the land. Yeah, can the sea technically cover all of land? And of course it could. But it's not. And that means that in the sea there's some Hagbolah. It's when you really dissect it, you see it's like very interesting Hagbolah. Because to say something, for example, is parameters, it's 5 inches long, or it's 10 inches tall, or it's brown or blue. There, we understand that that's a very defined, finite entity. The truth is that also needs to be understood, but we understand. It's very easy for us to understand because we see it all the time. Things have height, weight, volume, width, etc., breadth. But he's trying to teach us and educate us of more sublime forms of gvul. Because this again is relevant to the interface. You want to know how to climb from gvul to bli gvul. You don't just jump into Mishkan and get burned up by the bli gvul. That doesn't work. You need the containers, meaning us, the most crass level of containers, to begin to appreciate. Like for example, one example would be, and I use this a lot when I teach, chesed, you want to teach people something. Look at an apple. A physical apple, hold it in your hand. So it's red or green or yellow, whatever. There's a shape, there's color, there's a taste. Then after a while, close your eyes and imagine the apple in your mind. You can in your mind envision exactly if you've memorized it, every crease. So what do you have in your mind right now? Do you have an apple? Obviously not. It's the idea, it's an image of an apple. It would be like an apple in a picture, but a picture is also tangible. In your mind, you have a picture. Will the picture last? Well, it depends how long your memory goes. It's short-term memory, but it doesn't matter. What is exactly in the mind? You open up your brain, you're not going to find an apple. You're not going to find even an image of an apple. But you and your consciousness have some type of thing. It's just an example of how something can be defined. So someone say, so is this apple in your brain gvul or bli gvul? Your answer is, it's gvul, it's an apple. One said, but it's bli gvul because it doesn't really, it can disappear in a second also. It's almost like it's an imaginary apple, so to speak. Now, I'm not saying it's an exact example, because obviously, because it's not Ein Sof Leis Pashtusa, but it just helps us, train us, that we're not airtight, finite existence, and that's it. There's ways to climb the ladder. For example, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Is that finite or infinite? The answer is it's finite. 2 plus 2 plus 4 is not 3 plus 3 equals 6. You know? But it's finite only in the context that it's a finite idea. But it's not finite like you'd call a table finite. It's not empirically finite in the sense that, because 2 plus 2 is 4, for example, this table only exists in this room. It does not exist in outer space. 2 plus 2 equals 4 does not occupy space. Everywhere. Anywhere in existence, 2 plus 2 equals 4. Whether they use those words or not, we're talking about the concept. So you have a thing that doesn't translate. So you say, so if someone said to you, what does not, let that be a riddle. It doesn't occupy any space, it's everywhere. Is this thing infinite? So, the initial answer would be, yeah, it's infinite, if it's everywhere. What do you mean? 2 plus 2 is everywhere, and it's not infinite. See what I'm saying? So you can have things that have so-called no parameters as we understand them, but they have other parameters. This is called, there's Gashmis Dikamokim and there's Ruchnis Dikamokim. The Rambam says Ruchnis Dikamokim means spiritual space is Maila. What is its level? There's also time. There's physical time and there's spiritual time. Physical time is yesterday, today, tomorrow. Past, present, and future. Spiritual time, or so-called, is not in the past, present. Spiritual time is cause and effect. What precedes what? A father comes before a son. So in our lives, it's time. The father lived first. The next generation is the children. And then the next. In concept, when you say Chochmah Bina, let's say, or Avid Aim, you're not talking about necessarily that Bina came after Chochmah in some period. Like, Chochmah was created day 1. Bina was created day 2. No. They all emerged. But Bina conceptually is a result of Chochmah. So in time, it's Klima V'ichur, meaning preceding, before, and after. The reason I'm elaborating, but even then, it's not that gevurah was created in day 2. It's when the creations of gevurah happen in day 2. I know it says Sheshis Yom Osa, not Sheshis B'Sheshis. They created 6. Yeah, but it doesn't. But in time, it's not that gevurah came a day later. But first of all, even the days are just reflective of levels and ruchnis. Yeah. So my point is, this is critical because if you really want to appreciate chesed or b'chlal spiritual, and to think differently, you can't see. One of the big problems I find from first myself and then with all of us, we're gashmisdika people. We think in physical terms. When someone tells you a spiritual idea, I could show this to you, demonstrate it. You immediately fit it into a physical model. So that's our model. Our existing resident models are physical. So when someone says to you, the famous guy, what existed before? What happened? What was there before the world was created? Immediately throws us all in the loop, because we don't understand what do you mean before, and then you're told there was no before, so there's nothing happened. Time itself. What happened before time? There was no time, so there was no. So they say, 1 second, but where was it? So what was going on? And it confuses us because we just have to start thinking, but is it before or is it not before? What was the second before Bereshis Bara Elokim? And they say there's no before. So then where is it? Is it here now? I'm just trying to show you that you need a lot of training just to get through that mind exercise. Because what are you talking about? We still think in terms of before. So we start parroting words. We say, before existence, there was no before. 1 second, what does that mean? If there was no before, then they can't call it before existence. So then,
now.
Right, exactly. And what we really come to determine is that existence is limited in a parameter of called time, before, after. And outside of that, there are no limits it forces you to think differently. And that is something, you can't learn chesed unless you go into that type of spiritual mode of thinking. And the more abstract, the healthier it is. Now, obviously, you want to bring it back into concrete. That's why I'm elaborating here just to show you how all this is really training us to see different. And the problem that we usually have with these ideas, because we're trying to apply it to our typical models. Is it this? Is it that? Is it that? Like even this thing. I'm not here, but I've heard sometimes people say, one second, so what is it? Is it Ein Sof or is it gevurah? Is it Poshet or it's not Poshet? And you see here the whole chapter is saying bli gevurah mamish, but you can't say it's bli gevurah mamish. He says, you can't say like pshit Ein Sof mamish. And then again he says it later a few times, bli gevurah mamish. Sometimes the expression is used as Ein Sof. Ak is Ein Sof mushal, meaning when you say Shema mushal, it's a borrowed Ein Sof. Like Mayim saying himself, expression,
bar term.
Yeah,
It's a borrowed term.
So it's not Ein Sof kipshute. It's Ein Sof relatively speaking. We talked about that. I think you mentioned something. I understood that basically we get to the din of aguna. The person that's lost in sea, you could assume that he's lost, because Shammai and Hillel. Because which means that, like if you lost in a river, or you don't say that. Why? Because the Mayim is assumed to be forever.
No, because in the physical way, she could have gone up someplace else, which we can't see because it's in themselves. Only in an area.
Oh, that's the point that you had, right? That because it can go up somewhere else, not because Ein Sof is like and the river is limited, is a limited thing, so someone's going to notice. Yeah. See, to say Ein Sof, when in truth we know that the water just goes from, let's say, England to the United States, so there's this, it's a big limit, but it's Ein Sof HaMushal, that's what it's called. But the point I'm making, okay, fine. So now it's established that air, therefore, now has an element of not total shapelessness. And so even the koyach, so see the difference between the two when he says that with, let's say, kelim are gvul mamish, so they create a shape in the air. Koyach gvul is a little more subtle because even the containers are not completely real gvul. The koyach gvul, the power. Like later he will describe the example of a hand that writes, like explained, and that too has an effect. As I said, number one, it's chesed, not gevurah. Number two, not outside of its own system. So that's the effect. And for something to happen, for Atzilus to go into an outside of its system, it needs something from beyond. It needs a revelation. It's not within the structure. So cannot be from the eris of Atzilus itself, that will be Kriyas Yamsuf, or those souls that pierced the curtain. And then came finally the distinction, which is also critical, that at the same time, it's not like the Koyach HaGvul, as it is before the Tzimtzum. Before the Tzimtzum, the Koyach HaGvul is two things. Number one, it's just like bli gevurah, it's God's power. And that's all that matters. Number two, gvul, the element of gvul, is not in any way recognizable there. In Atzilus, the Koyach HaGvul has an impact. It doesn't let the energy go out of Atzilus into Biyah. The Koyach HaGvul before the Tzimtzum doesn't really do anything. It's not functional.
It hasn't been created yet, the whole idea of gvul.
That's the point.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying. There's no Metzias there. But he's making the distinction because he wants to just show you, because it's relevant. Because at the end of the day, the Koyach HaGvul in Kelim of Atzilus is rooted in the Koyach HaGvul of Nei Tzimtzum. It's rooted there. But there, it's still in a state of complete potential. So it would be I think later he gives this example. So in your hand, when you're about to write, and you can write unlimited amount of words, but you have a Koyach HaGvul, it's different than the Koyach HaGvul in the hand and the Koyach HaGvul in the soul. Because in the soul, it's not even manifest yet, even in an instrument. It's completely. But he makes those two distinctions. Number one, that it's there. It's one of God's faculties. It's Ein Sof bli gevurah mamish. Everything's Ein Sof mamish. So you can't ask how they had Gilead and Sof there. And second thing, he's saying that even in the Koyach HaGvul, basically 2 points. One is that the Koyach HaGvul is Ein Sof mamish, literally infinite there. And number two, even as it is Koyach HaGvul, it's completely non-functional, non-existent. This is relevant also in the interface, because you could say, One second, if you have number one, what do you need number two? Because the point is, you're saying even on the terms of keich hagvul, it does not yet have manifestation. Until after the tzimtzum, which will conceal the energy, then you'll have the rishima, and then ultimately the first gvul will be, as the Atzilus says, is containers. Okay, I just wanted to elaborate this for myself and also for...
Or has it been actualized? Okay, the gvul. Because
Chapter 13, bottom of page 20. Ulevad kol hanal. Okay, so if you think the plot thickens, let's go on. Ulevad kol hanal. And besides all the above, okay, lo yetakan lemer the masha'er nikle era chesed ze rak la'achlis lapshus b'kli. Okay, so if you think you got it all figured out, goes no. Because now he's going like this. You could say, okay, fine. You made a case that the eras are not shapeless at all, completely shapeless. They have some shape, but you could say the shape is only once they go into the container.
when you say shape, you mean the assumed properties of the kelim.
He doesn't say those words. He just says that they have to have, because if they assume the properties, then it's like the colors of the glasses. He doesn't say that.
Some of the properties. No, you can't.
He doesn't say that at all here. No, actually, he doesn't. He stays away from saying anything close to that.
Because it's hard to say shape on something that's not tangible.
That's why I'm elaborating. It's not correct. It's Eir HaChesed. However you explain it, there's Eir HaChesed before container.
But is it a shape? Is it a physical shape? It can't
It's
be
called chesed. I told you, what is an apple a physical shape? It's
Right,
not
so
you're going again with physical. You asked me a physical,
Right, but
it's not physical.
It assumes the properties of.
Even kalim, by the way, are not physical. Let's get that clear.
It assumes the properties of the kelim of chesed.
No, it's not correct. What you're saying now is not correct. Let me ask you, how do you explain kalim of Atzilus? That's not physical either. What does that assume? Kalim of Atzilus are God's ability to create chesed. It doesn't have to assume some other. Forget about physical now. So you're talking about physical would be like a glass that's clear, and you put water in it. If the glass is colored, the water is colored. Let's not talk like that. Kalim of Atzilus, let's talk about air now. What's kalim? Let's just define kalim. Kalim are not physical. Kalim are also spiritual. But they're God's power, the divine power of Keich HaGvul, that Eibush has the power to create chesed, gevurah, tefes. Now, if you really want to explain that to me, how containers of Atzilus are chesed, gevurah, it's not. That also needs explanation. Because it's also not tangible. It's not a table. I told you, we think so. You don't realize how much we think Gashmistic. Because because your problem is with Eir. I can tell you the problem is with Kalim, really, if you think about it. And then I'll ask what's the difference in Kalim of Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, and Asiya, and we're still not Gashmis. That means you have in Kalim itself right away 4 levels of containers, and one is more so-called crass than the next, and it's still not Gashmis. I'm just showing you, we are so limited. By us, there's only one container. It's a cup. It's a plate. It's a whatever it is. It's my hands. So immediately you have to start saying, 1 second. I got the. I just want to show you how far this goes. So if you really want, we could spend the whole life just on this page. I'll explain. Let me explain this. Okay, we have physical world, and we're told this physical world is a keli for elikus. Okay, so we just assume that. Oh, that sounds beautiful. What does it mean? You do a mitzvah. He made the world a little better, more refined. But elikus is not physical. So how is this ever going to meet? This is very difficult to understand. It is. So now I'm saying like this. I gave an example of an apple, imaginary apple. Mm-hmm. So you'll say to me, okay, I got. So now I have 2 worlds. I have a physical apple and an imaginary apple. But how many?
Virtual.
Yeah.
In today's terms.
Right. But then I'll say to me, okay, we'll call that asiya ruchnis. What about now Yitzira? What's your example for that? So now you have to have an example of just that, relatively speaking, just like your mind can have an image of a physical apple, there's something that can have an image of the image in even more subtle form. That gets very difficult to comprehend.
It sounds through a computer a little bit. So
Okay, something, but
it's...
No, we're not talking about manipulating the apple. We're talking about a more refined version of it. As in relation, just as the refinement of the apple, the sublimity of the apple in your mind compared to the physical, you want something that's a sublime, a deeper compared to that sublime. Let's put it this way: even if you can figure out an example or 2, you're going to stop somewhere. It's just that's why we're not neshamas of Atzilus. We really. So we're talking words, to be honest. Comprehension, really comprehending that level of spirituality, we can go on. There are ways to explain it. But if you really, as I said, I mean, you really want to get this is going to require a lot of davening and a lot of hisbanus. This is not mathematical. And just you're going to figure out, this requires this is echus dik aveda.
Right,
This is, no, it's not like you're going to learn a little more Gemara and now understand or learn another Mefedish. This requires an edelkeit to get to a point of refinement in yourself to understand things that are more, edel, and how far can I go? It's not that simple, and it needs training. So here we're going like this is all kalim. I'm not even talking about eres. Okay? Relatively speaking, okay, so now we go through kalim, kalim. Now kalim of Atzilus, which, by the way, according to this Koyach HaGvul, forget about it. Koyach HaGvul is not even Gvul. And not even Gvul, it's not even Gvul Ruchni. It's Koyach HaGvul Ruchni, because the Gvul, it's not even Gvul Ruchni like in Bria. It's Gvul, instead of what's going on here. That's only Kalim. Now comes Eidus, and you're asking me that question. That's what I'm just saying, pointing out the question to you. And he's not saying that it's assuming. That's it's part of the question. You'll see the shittas of Eidus Mitzvah that some opinions hold. That's why I'm so adamant about it. It's not just time I didn't mention it. There are shittas, there are opinions, Kabbalistic opinions that hold that the air it assumes the character of the keli. That's all it does. It doesn't have anything of its own. Well, he's going to bring both opinions. We'll get there. There's three opinions about this. Then even that, some will say, well, but the fact that it assumes it means there's all energy can assume it? No. It has to be air in the keli. There's some energy that can't even assume it. That means that it has something before it assumed it. The question is what? So all this is discussed in Kabbalah. This is the Gimel Shittas, the famous opinions on air. But we'll get there. I just want to point out that he's not saying that. He's saying here, he keeps saying that you have to say that the air itself has spheres. That's why he brought Atik and Arich. Where does it get it from? There's no Kelim in Atik. So there's nothing, it's not assuming anything. In Atik, there's no Kelim. He made it very clear. So where does air have its spheres? So you have to say the same Keich. So here's the question. So you have to say, hypothetically, the same Keich HaGvul, the Eibishter, that created air chesed, and Kelim put something in air also. That is let's put it this way, like the mind. The fact that you can imagine an apple. We could have said that God could have created it. You can't imagine in your mind, physical. As much as you try, you'll never be able to take it to your mind. Your mind can only relate to spiritual ideas. But not the way it is. Like a malach cannot come down to this earth, will not relate to physical ideas. Only an Shammai has the ability to come into the physical world and relate to it, and then spiritualize it. Look, this is fascinating stuff about how spirit and matter work, and this requires you cannot take anything here for granted. I can tell you right now, anything you learned can work against you because you think you got it already. Eidus and Kalim, most people say, Eidus and Kalim, that's not so bad. Eidus and Kalim of Atzilus, what's the big thing? Eidus going to Kalim. You start saying, can you tell me there's Eidus and Kalim and Atzilus? Atzilus is Ruchnisdik. So we're talking about two levels of Ruchnis, and they're both higher than B'nai Tzirasi. Most people will be stuck. Or they'll dismiss it because they don't want to go there. It's not a simple matter to understand this. I frankly would have a whole challenge just to explain Asiyah Ruchnis. Like I said, the apple, to understand the apple in the mind, or 2 + 2 is 4, is enough to struggle with.
It's a big difference between the 2 + 2 is 4 apple. The apple is a physical matter of something physical.
Okay.
There's another idea, so it's not hard.
No, good. And I'm sure, but these things don't come. Even if I understood it, if you don't understand it, I could give you issues. You have to start with Leighton. And Leighton, it has to, for it to settle, for it to be integrated, you have to be able to think like this. Look, the first step is, really the truth, the first step is, interestingly, is not getting it. It's not getting it. First you have to know you don't get it. And I don't mean that in a bad way. You have to realize our minds are limited. As soon as that you have that, you're talking business. Then now we're ready to go somewhere. You don't have that clay raycon. Then you think, okay, you know what? Like some people say, I don't get it yet. Give me 5 more minutes, I'll get it. That's not what we're talking about here. That's using your brilliance. I'm going to figure it out. It's the opposite. You have to first quiet down. That's why really you need davening and you need humility, because you can't have your way of thinking dominate here. The Rebbe says you can't see me and live. What does that mean? You want to be you. You're not going to see me. You're going to see you. And you'll see me through your lens. You're not going to see me through me. That's the challenge here. So look, we can really, this itself on truth, if I really wanted to teach this properly, I would prefer to read this, learn this, and this should be in writing. This has to be written. But you see, even our discussion right now is very eye-opening for anybody, because we don't think like that. We think, the only thing I'm missing is I need to learn a little more. This is not so simple. The advantage of, you talk about Ayin Beis, you asked me this question, because I'm struggling with it myself. Not struggling, I know for sure, I see things myself. Even this, the fact that he's dissecting forces you. See, when you learn the Maimon in Torah Eir from the Alter Rebbe, he says, Eres and Kelmet, says, get me life weiter. Doesn't force you to go because he's not doing all this. He doesn't dissect it. As soon as you dissect it, that's an example where the Rambam, it can be a chiddush. Because as soon as you dissect, let's say, in Masechta Shabbos it says like this, in Masechta Sanhedrin it says like that. You bring it together in halacha, you start dealing with. So there's places Taisvis does it or the Mefarshim. But then even the codifiers who collected, and you could say they were only encyclopedic. They weren't only encyclopedic. They had to deal with inconsistencies. Or parent ones.
You strip away layers.
And you strip layers because you start putting it together, and suddenly something has to emerge. A halachic model. So the same thing is here. Just the mere fact, I'm not even talking about the yesh lamers. See, even here, the yesh lamer in chapter Ayin Beis. It's a fundamental yesh lamer. Ami yesh lamer shagama eris are not pshutim legam. What is this? The first time someone says it? The Rebbe Rashab is the first one that says that eris are not pshutim. What's the yesh lamer? Because the yesh lamer in the context, no one has brought it into this context. The context here is that, is it ein areich or not? It's not just, of course there's an opinion in Kabbalah that it's not, that the eris are not completely shapeless.
Maybe that's the finish. Maybe to say and say.
Yeah, fine, but he keeps on going yesh lamer. And my point I'm trying to say is that this dissecting is, this, when you learn Torah, you learn the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim. It's mind-blowing, revolutionary. Chassidus Chabad, Chochmah, Alter Rebbe, Neshama Chadash, there's no question. But you have to, first of all, it's like almost like the level of Rishonim. Like learning Rishonim without Achrein, or learning Mishnah without Gemara. Those that understood in the Mishnah what it says in the Gemara were amazing people. But you could learn a Mishnah, you'll never figure out 99% of what the Gemara says. My point is, of course, it's all there, in the Alter Rebbe. But to make it a blueprint for the world to receive, I don't think you can just take Torah Eir, even with the best translations. Yes, if you had those chassidim and they explained it like Ayin Beis, fine. But if you don't, within chassidus, it's still. Now that's interesting because you talk about Dagus and Blikvul. Here's a good example, because we say the Alter Rebbe is already Chabad compared to the Baal Shem Tov. So the Baal Shem Tov is really Mekudis. Here's a perfect example how you go. The Baal Shem Tov, you read the Baal Shem Tov Teiros. Yeah, there's great stuff. It's an interesting way of looking to a comprehensive blueprint, a system. Esesphiris and Elamis. It's this to the Baal Shem Tov is like, But this is all. You look down the Baal Shem. Go back to the Baal Shem Tov. You'll see it all there. So my point that I'm trying to make is that there are examples here. And Alter Rebbe was already, that's before Yutes Kislev was already more than Baal Shem Tov. Then there's after Yutes Kislev. This is an example. Eilis, Kalim, B'rihi, Tzira, maybe. And then we come to Rebbe Rashab. This, even though you can't translate this and just put it on the internet, but you have here enough from a Rebbe, not a chassid, you have from a Rebbe enough issues that dissecting this and applying it will make people think like we're talking now. And that can change the world. So that I can tell you right now, that's for sure. Now you learn the Rebbe Rashab a single Maimor, or even many single Maimorim, because he doesn't himself bring it all together, you have to bring it all together. So it's still, you're like not so sure, is it really? Here, he's actually, the Rebbe himself is taking it all and comparing. You see, here it brings together this discipline, the gevurah, keich gevurah, qualifies it. It was up to Levad Kol Hanal. And this is only chapter 12, 13 of 144 discourses. That goes, I calculated something like 770,000 words in the whole of Ayin Beis. Based on, I looked at, I didn't really, based on the count of the pages and the letters and the words. It's a lot of words.
These are all virtual worlds, and within the virtual worlds, there are virtual ideas.
No, so the point is that this is supposed to be provocative. To really get this, you have to learn to go back and start again. You can't do it all. To me, this is like going through first time, a little depth, a little more depth, trying to really make it relevant. Trying, I know my objectives here. If the objective was to really go all the way internally into one chapter, we'd have a whole different type of. Then we have to discuss what ruchnius is, and okay. So I think the way we're doing is all right. It's a good platform, and then you build on it. Now, these are one of the things I put on the website is actually points to consider. That when you finish a chapter, what thoughts? Like a good class, a good teacher, and then the class is going to say, here are the things to consider. This is an effort here. I'm thinking right now myself, and now I'm not even talking about before Atzilus and and then we talk about lenient tzimtzum. People just lenient tzimtzum. They have it all figured out. Lenient tzimtzum is not even, you can't even figure out spiritual. And I heard from somebody who said it, that they said about the Rebbe's brother, Gimel, here was his Yahrzeit, that his Havana chesed was so deep, he was able to explain the difference of all the levels, all the way to 3 levels after the tzimtzum, with simple English, simple language, without using chesidic language. Now, let's say if I would explain to you all these abstract levels, let's say the apple, 2 plus 2 is 4. Next. And you can go all the way 3 levels before the tzimtzum. That's pretty, I would say, pretty good. I just heard this Shabbos, someone told me this. He heard it from Nachum Goldschmidt. Nachum Goldschmidt was very close with the Shammai and Hillel in Tel Aviv. So he was a big mashpia chesed. Your father knew Nachum Goldschmidt, probably. So he was a serious. He was a mashgiach in Nigla. He's in the yeshiva. So they asked him why. He says, that's my nefesh habamis. This is my nefesh halakis. This is kafir. So that's what I heard. So that is, if you think about it, that requires a whole different refinement of the mind. And this is actually refreshing to hear, I would say, because I think we'll say, okay, it's a matter of time. I'll master chesed. No. What we talk about learning chesed and understanding it is this is what it means. It's refining the way you think, and you look at things completely different. You look at things in a more spiritual way and more not magushim. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that the whole point of the whole yesod of Ava is those that make kufam iker, v'nishmasam tofel, shmasam tofel, can never really have Ava. What do you think? The world doesn't have Ava to just teach them the Shammai iker? It's not so easy. If it was so simple, we would have Mashiach here already. Because to teach people that the guf is not iker and the guf is not iker, the sham is iker and the guf is tofel, is itself a whole life. For 2,000 years we're struggling with this. You could say from the beginning of Adam and Chava we're struggling with it. Because we are trapped in the physical world. Let's not kid ourselves. Awareness of that is the beginning of redemption. Awareness. You have to know that. Don't think you're already a ruchnistic person. Because even the most ruchnistic are trapped in gashmis. And I'm talking here at a contemplation level. We're not even talking about emotions now. This is give it to me in seichel. Emotions means that you feel it, that you live it. We can't figure out even bria kim of yitzira in our minds, let alone the feeling of it. But Chassidus says when you begin to understand it, you begin to feel it. So I think just being aware of what I just stated now is an excellent first step. The first step to everything. You have to. Now this maybe explains what we learned later in my morning, about moidani. First step is acknowledging. Forget about. The Pesukah de Zimra is a pretty big achievement. Shema, just acknowledge. You acknowledge that there's a bigger reality. Look, it's about understanding there's really a God. God is not just another thing out there. You can do whatever you like. To say that I believe in God and I believe in all the Torah mitzvahs, we don't behave as if God is with us all the time. If we did, Rabbi Yechim Ben Zaki wouldn't have to tell his students that halavai you should fear God if you fear other human beings. Because we fear other human beings, that's the fact. We don't fear God. Yeah, we have superstition, we maybe have yiras chet, yiras einish, whatever, yiras einish rather. Yiras ritzua. But to really appreciate God, you really need to, first of all, understand something greater than you are. So that alone, you don't have to live in Ayin Beis for that. But Ayin Beis definitely makes you, at the end of, in the year one of the years in Torah Shalom, he says, we talk about these deep things. He talks about a whole thing from Ayin Beis. He says at the end, Weil man verschass mir weiß, wenn man hat zu tun, hat man einander derech eretz. You hear that? That's amazing. It means when you know who you're dealing with, you have a different respect. So it's not even relevant, even if you don't know all the details. But you know, oh, 1 second. I can't even figure out Yitzira. Verstehst me? Let alone, you have a different respect. You're talking now a whole different thing. Now, for me to go there, it's a serious journey here. This isn't some quick. I could tell you, going to yeshiva, you don't get this impression. You know, you're told, but you get the impression, especially when you learn nigla, you master ideas. So you may be not a great master, people master, but you know that it's masterable, basically. You know that it's something that you could reach, and it's very much. You don't need to. You listen. A brilliant scholar obviously will understand Shas in a different way, but this type of going completely out of yourself into another reality doesn't exist in Nigla, because Nigla is ultimately understanding a legal system, logic. A lot of it is brilliant psychology, understanding humans, understanding a Torah logic, but it doesn't take you to a journey into Atzilus. I mean, when you learn Chesed, you know that Nigla also does, but on its own, you're not forced to go. You're not forced to change the paradigm of your thinking. You're forced to struggle and hard of it. It's just a matter. It's like, in a way, the infinite that I said. It's like the numbers. You're not there yet. What you have, you have. If you know something in Gemara, no one says that what you know is you don't know. You just don't know more. When you learn this, you start realizing what I know, I don't even know. Even what I know, the way I grasp something, I don't grasp properly. We don't. Huh? We don't even. In other words, to come to relate that, we don't even know how to grasp something.
That's the word it comes. Thinking out of the box. Thinking out
exactly.
of the box.
It's because thinking out of the box means first thing.
Parameters,
But being deeper than that, I would say the first step of thinking out of the box is first thinking in the box. It's first learning how to think. That's why we don't know how to think. We don't know how to think. It's really retraining how we think. I see this all the time. Like, for example, I deal with people. I could see, and I could point out to you. I'll put a problem on the table and ask a few people to solve this problem. You immediately will see how people don't think properly, by contrast. Because a trained person will say, you know what, all of you missed. And it's not about a quiz and a riddle that you didn't chop it. It's experience. It's a level of appreciation of a situation. Because then you suddenly start thinking, you know what, you're right. The reason I don't think that way. Now, a lot of people will be insulted. They feel they've lost the test. Because real people will say, let me learn. What did I do wrong? And they'll learn that it wasn't a problem you didn't chop the answer. You don't think in the right way. You have to retrain how you look at a problem. You know, you may be reacting sometimes emotionally to the issue, so it doesn't let you see another side. You may be looking at the symptoms instead of the root. I mean, there's a whole process. So really, it's retraining how we think. That's a whole different thing. I have to qualify. Learning Gemara also retrains how you think. You know, you think the thoroughness, the comprehensiveness, and so on. But when I'm talking about qualitatively thinking about thinking not in empirical terms is a whole different thing. The Ragat and some others actually, they abstracted Torah into a point where they, you look at Torah almost like in a more of a type of axioms and certain rules, yeah. But that's like any system of logic. Whew. Okay, so let's continue here. This has been more a room. So he says, Levat kol hanal, besides all the above, lo yitakan lemer. Lo yitachen, you say lo yitaken. Not with a kuf. I mean, lo yitachen. Okay, lo yitachen lemer. Yeah, right. Besides all the above, lo yitachen lemer. How did you translate tachen? It's not plausible to say. It's not plausible to say the masha nikra era chesed zeurak achlis lapshusi b'kli. That to say that the energy is the energy of love is only after it manifests in the container. But on its own, it could really be era gevurah. It could be energy of gevurah. It's interesting how he says it. What's this? Daf Pezayin Amar Aleph. Okay, it's my.
Yeah.
It's not. Because if that's the case, what is then the whole thing that says in the Zohar? He gives the page 87a. Amigdash Melech is the commentary there in the name of the Arizal. Achlifu duchtayu. The concept of achlifu duchtayu. Achlifu duchtayu, let's go there, is with an exchange of roles. A reversal or exchange of roles. Achlifu is like machlif pora v'chamer. An exchange. An exchange of duchtayu is roles. So we have the concept, you have to sleep the tayu. Eir ha-chesed l'klei gevurah. If you think it gets complicated, there you go. But the truth is, this is going to help us understand it. I want to say something. Here, listen to this. The apple on the table, the apple in your mind. In Atzilus, you have to say there's an apple. But it's not in the mind, it's not like that. It's an apple, not an orange. However, it's not called an apple there. It would be called, let's say, chesed. So, the only similarity it has to the apple down below would be that it's not something else. But there's no way, if you saw the two, you probably would not recognize that they're.
It would be called gevurah because if it's an apple, then
No, fine, I understand.
the color and a red, and also
Yeah. No, I understand. I didn't mean which level.
sour taste.
Let's take water. Let's take water.
That's very good, Marshall.
Okay,
You
yeah.
got me right,
Right.
You're right. I never thought about it that way. That it wouldn't be an apple; it would be more manifestation of gevurah because it's sour and it's
It's
color.
chmitzos, yeah. So you have water here, and let's say someone's able to put chesed of Atzilus nearby. You look at it; it's an alien. You have no idea that this is this on that level. If you're able to take out that image of the water in your mind, and put it on the table,
Got another level.
yeah, you do. That no, because I realize now, because he's saying it's chesed and gevurah, so I realize that Atzilus, at least the similarity is that it's something and not something else. So that's right away one thing. Then there's the question of Ein Sof this Pashtusan. Like in Atzilus, you would say the apple, the water, whatever. Even in the mind, you can't say the apple extends forever. In the mind, you close your eyes, you see an apple, that's the size. You could say maybe on a higher level, the concept no longer is defined by that type of parameter. It's chesed, not gevurah, but in essence, it's flowing all the way, all the time. I mean, it needs a lot of abstraction. It's very poetic. Anyway, so he's saying achlifu duchtayu, exchange of roles. What is that? Eir ha-chesed b'klei ha-gevurah. Achlifu duchtayu is the concept that although chesed has a role, a distinct role different from gevurah, there are times where they'll exchange roles. And you'll have really chesed. It's really chesed, but it's in a container of gevurah. This is not to be confused with Iskalus.
Easy to explain it about a father who hits.
No, but that's Iskalus. We'll see what it means. Because Iskalus is not achlifu duchtayu. Iskalus is that chesed itself has gevurah sheba chesed, has this. It's not achlifu. The achlifu duchtayu is an exchange of roles. One has to understand what's the difference between achlifu duchtayu and Iskalus, because you could argue what you just said, that he's using the container of gevurah, discipline, but he means love. But that's gevurah sheba chesed. Or chesed sheba gevurah, however you explain it. But let's just continue here. If you're going to say that air, energy, doesn't have on its own any shape, any identity, called chesed, but on its own it could have been called gevurah, the whole concept of achlifu duchtayu falls apart. You can't call it an exchange. What exchange of what? It could have been either way. It could have been chesed, it could have been gevurah. So now it's an achlifu of gevurah, now it's an achlifu of chesed. Before, it's a very basic proof. It's not like closer to chesed before it comes into the container. So why is it called achlifu? What exchange is there?
It has to be that the Kabbalah held that it's pshutus, that there is a pshut, had to have some sort
You're
of.
jumping the gun. He's going to discuss it. Of course, this is pages upon this. Of course, this is. If you look at the end of the day, when you look at all the opinions, you'll see yesh b'zeh ma'ashem b'zeh. Some have used this proof, but then this proves the other way. At the end of the day, they all are all the opinions are correct. It all depends on what level you're talking. They all talked in a sense linearly about the way they understood the level. It's like Shammai and Hillel. At the end of the day, they're both correct. It depends on gevurah chesed. In halacha, yeah. In another place it is explained. In achlifu duchtayu al derech moshel. The exchange of roles, like an example of Shammai and Hillel, sheshneim kiblu mirav echad. Shemaya and Avtalyon. Both of the example is from Shammai and Hillel, two great sages. Both of them received from one teacher. The parenthesis, yes, shekiblu mishmaya and Avtalyon k'meshekos mokum. The Pirkei Avos, not the Pirkei Avos, the first Perek. It says they received from Shemaya and Avtalyon, like it says in Pirkei Avos, chapter 1. Where it says, Hem Kiblu. So they received from one teacher, Svara Aleph, Svara Achas, one Svara, one idea. They both heard the same thing, and nevertheless, one of them said it's prohibited, and this one says it's permitted.
Based on that Svara.
But he's going to explain. Meaning the air itself was the same. The change came about in their containers. Shammai, gevurah, Shammai, who's from the side of gevurah, intensity or discipline, he leans toward isur, towards prohibiting, which comes from the level of gevurah. Gevurah sees the pitfalls. It's very discerning eye. So it's much more a sharper eye in that sense. Chesed looks at the positive, what's possible. So the Hillel Shohei Mitzad Chesed, and Hillel came from the level of Chesed, which is kindness, love. Neita leheter, he leans towards permitting. Shubchinas Chesed, that's the level of Chesed. Avla ha'eres, this is what's explained elsewhere. Avla ha'eres shu hasvara shekiblu mirabam. But the energies, which is the theory, the svara, the idea that they received from their teacher, Alishneim kiblu svara achas. Both of them they both can receive the same idea because it didn't. Shemaya and Avtalyon didn't speak first to Shammai and then to Hillel. We could say, maybe there was a little change in how they spoke. The same shir, the same class, and this one took it this way, this. So they both received exactly the same thing. They both heard the same thing. But they changed according to the temperature. Temperament, or temperature, personality. We spoke mezek later. We spoke about combination, formula, but temperament is good, of the container. Now he adds in a parentheses. The parentheses goes for a good 10 lines. We can say this is similar to what's explained. So it can be compared to what explains the concept of air mayim rekia. Air mayim rekia literally means energy, water, and sky. So there's like 3 states of being that are, again, one more refined than the next. The Maya night, water moves. It's always flowing. It flows. The Kia glidamaya, and the sky is like like frozen water. Of course, it doesn't mean exactly frozen water. We're not talking about ice or snow, but it means that the Kia has an element that is like more solidified, more solid. That's what it means. Yeah. Derived is like a how would you translate? Gelled. There's also the word glida comes from here. Like ice cream, it's like a frozen. Meaning, bottom line is like this. We know in science we have gas, liquid, solid. So a solid can be broken down to liquid, and a liquid could be heated and turn to a gas. And we could also reverse the process. The waters evaporate, the seeds. The evaporation turns into vapor, which is like a gas, goes upward, and it forms the clouds, which in turn, if you look at a cloud is not wet, but a cloud in turn has moisture in it, so it turns into rains with the right proper combinations. It's not exactly Air Mayim Rekia, but it's a similarity of different stages. And by the way, God created all these different types of stages, like water, liquid, gas, liquid, solid. It's good examples also for moving like from more sublime, more sublime. The same thing, like if someone says to you, your child asks you, okay, take a piece of wood, throw it into a fireplace, and the wood burns, I see it burning, and it's turning into fuel, or a Hanukkah candle. You look at it, and you see a wick. What's going on exactly? And it's turning if you didn't take a wick, you put a piece of metal, it wouldn't burn. And then the oil slowly gets eaten up. How is oil being converted into fire? It's not just a simple process. So science has its ways of explaining how matter turns into energy. Heat or speed are two forces that when you speed something up or you heat it up, it turns one item into another. It breaks it down into its elements, but it turns into a fuel. But if you think about it, it's similar. How do you get from here to here? Because again, we think very linearly. That's why in the primitive times, they didn't have that science because they saw something, they saw it. Today we understand, and we not only we understand, we know how to manipulate. We can now speed up process. We can take something and turn it into something else. I mean, we have automobiles, we have airplanes. It's all gas burning fuel that's fueling a machine. So anyway, going back here, so Vahainu, the Mayim Himikudis HaChochma. In the spiritual levels, Mayim, Mayim, Rekiva, 3 levels. Mayim is the Nikudah of Chochma, the spark, the point of wisdom, where the idea begins, a cognitive process begins. Shechel Madain La'tesu L'Kol Tzad. Like water that moves, you can still move it to every direction. You know, like when you have you think of an idea.
Well, it's still dynamic, not static.
Okay.
The Kia is static, and
You
water
could say
is
dynamic and static, yeah. You could still, so therefore, when you get the spark of the idea before it's been fleshed out or embellished upon, can go many directions. The Gimel Madregas, Emaim Nekiyim Ba'ashefa, Shenimshich Min HaMashpia L'Kabel. The concept of Emaim Nekiyim, 3 levels, is the flow, is the transmission that transmits from a transmitter to a recipient, from a the Eru Kamoish Ashpo he adain Eitzla Mashpia Behel. First level. Is how the transmission is still concealed within the mashpia, within the transmitter. Well, Mayim Kamoish Nimshul Biz Galos Min HaMashpia L'Mekabel. Mayim is already how it's already transmitting in a revealed way from the giver to the recipient.
the process of transmission.
The source. Okay, but it's like this. Here's the source, here's the recipient, and there's a line that connects the two. Mayim is when it's still within him. The transmission itself is Mayim. Is when it's in the mashpia. Mayim is the transmission, and Rakia is when it solidifies within the recipient. It's received, contained, like it sells elsewhere. So he's now explaining the comparison here. So Kamoy Kain, same as in the seichel of the teacher, he doesn't yet have a separation, a distinction between chesed and gevurah. That's like Shemaya and Avtalyon. Yeah.
That's the
Yeah. ובהשגה שלהם נעשה חלקות לחסד גבורה כפי איפה ההשגה עם מבחינת חסד אי. The השגה of the recipient, on the other hand, meaning here like Shammai and Hillel, so Shemaya and Avtalyon would be its weights in them, or even in Mayim, because in the transmission itself, it doesn't yet have distinction. But in their asagah, when they receive it, in their comprehension of it, there's already a distinction between chesed and gevurah. With Shammai going towards gevurah and Hillel chesed. Kfi eifin asagah, according to their way of understanding, which means their containers. If it's from chesed or the opposite. Umavur b'mokam achar is explained elsewhere. Sheyesh b'chinas er mayim rekia ad reim hamaylis. Explained elsewhere that these 3 levels exist on all the levels, all the way up to the highest levels. Ubashashneim b'chinas gimel rishein is the atik, and their root they're the gimel rishein of atik. Basically Chabad or Kachab. In Atik itself, the three first spheres. The gimel l'reishon shehem b'chinas kadmon v'tzachzum mitzuch. Yeah, and the heads of the heads, which is the line language. We'll go elsewhere. It discusses kadmon, tzach, and mitzuch. Three things. Kadmon, tzach, and mitzuch. Kadmon means a primordial energy. Tzach is very refined, and mitzuch is even more refined. How would you translate tzach? Tzach is edelkeit. Tzach is subtle, and even greater subtlety. And this is a parenthesis again for the thoroughness of it. I'm not going to elaborate now because let's stick to the theme.
Tzach also is polished.
Yeah, but
you take a keli and you polish it very well, it shines. It's like
we say al derech hatzachos. That's the sunnis. But tzachos, that's different. That's a different thing. I meant dak actually. When I said I meant dak, subtle tzach. Yeah, tzach refined. You could say refined, polished. Yeah. So bottom line is, he just gave an example, which I think helps a little. Ermaim Rekia, that is where there's no distinction. So it's called This is basically remember, this is making a case here that doesn't have. Well, we're going back to achlifu duchtayu. We'll soon get back to it. But the point is, the question here is whether has any shape of its own, any identity of its own without the container.
But Rabbi Shammai says that it does have, and the other
Yeah.
Kabbalah say it doesn't. So could from here it's much more like the other Kabbalah.
Well, we don't know yet.
Okay.
He's going to obviously bring it out. So, but he brought from because it says achlifu duchtayu is used Shammai and Hillel because sometimes Shammai is like Hillel and Hillel sometimes like Shammai. That's what he's going to lead up to. But we'll get there in a moment. Right now, he began discussing that elsewhere it says achlifu duchtayu is an example of Shammai and Hillel, and right now Shammai and Hillel in this discussion. So far, the does not have. The is one transmission. Shammai gevurah, Hillel chesed, and he explained now that's mayim rekia. The difference between mayim rekia, which is on the to the highest levels. Back to the outside of the parentheses. Now, they return, and they come a second time to hear the same theory, the same idea, from the mouth of the teacher. What is the second time? Spiritually speaking, it's when the eris leave the containers. The energy leaves the containers in the containers, in other words, of the students. They put their chesed gevurah aside, basically, and they go to the teacher, the kabel, to receive the teacher of the Rav HaMashpia, the teacher who's transmitting, the transmitter.
It's like they're coming back with an open mind, so to speak,
exactly.
metaphorically speaking.
Now, the second time they can exchange the erech chesed.
They can understand each other's opinion.
They can exchange the erech chesed should be in the klei gevurah.
Yeah.
That the energy of chesed should be in the container of gevurah.
Yeah.
Hold on. Because the theory, the idea, the concept that they receive from their teacher, hirak. So rak is in the parentheses. It's only mokrach sadim hagvuras. It's only the root of the chsadim and the gevurah, of the leniency and the stringency. Because the actual theory, the actual idea, does not yet manifest in any form of chesed or gevurah. Valkein yochelias, in parentheses he adds. That's why they can be exchanged. In this subject matter or in another. Sometimes the application somewhere else can be different. Like we see practically, virtually, with our eyes. But Baal Seichel, by a wise person. He receives a certain logical idea, intellectual idea, and he comprehends it in a certain particular fashion. Afterwards, when he hears or learns it a second time, another time, the same this seichel, this idea, he understands it in a different way. And it's not because the first time, the preceding time, he made a mistake in this. He made a mistake.
He does that means he fooled himself.
Right. I was going to say that, but
Nah.
it means that it was wrong basically. It's on the contrary, it's because the seichel is shapeless, so to speak, or yet it does not yet have defined conclusions or defined way of understanding. It's that it is able to exchange. It should be in this type of way of understanding it or another type of way of understanding. Should be inyan echad. Oh yeah, of course. Even in the same inyan, it could be sometimes understood this way, that way. Definitely, how much more so a different seichel, meaning applying. In a different application, because you could say the theory applies here, but in another situation, the theory is an exception. There's a nuance. There's a yetzim and a klal. But here, saying in the same seichel, even you could have both. Two different ways we look at something, and definitely something new that you could just that sometimes you can understand chesed lepam legvura.
Why? Because the seichel is not solid. That's the word from the parentheses.
Chesed is still dynamic, as you put it, or it's still not shaped by the, let's say, the bina elements of it.
It's not solid. It's not solidified.
Okay.
You could still
No,
it's the key what he said before.
I understand what you're saying. But it's not just not solid. It's not just not solid yet. It's not developed yet. It's not fully developed yet. It's an abstract idea. It would be like someone saying, the whole is greater than the part. Was that mechayev or mezaka? Is that also? So the answer is, that each one can take a different approach to it. I'm just, like you could say like this, like it says, by davening, you have to submit yourself to God. So someone can say that means to think about gadlus akel. That would be Hillel. Shammai would say to think about shiful sodom, because they both reach you to God. But and then someone say, let's think about that again. And say, 1 second, you could go the other way around. I'm just giving quick examples. In other words, when you hear a concept sometimes is not yet, you can call it not solid yet, but it's not definitely not solid. It could be a good concept, but it's not yet been applied to a situation where one would demand chesed or gevurah. I don't want to say conclusive. Let me finish reading. I want to see, because there's probably kinds of, you see, he's building it up. So what do we have so far? We have so far that the teacher, there's no chesed and gevurah. He did say there's a shadish of it. But now he added them coming back again. So in other words, the explain of his achlifu duchtayu, therefore, is not actually Eira Klei. What it's saying is not really Eira Chesed B'Klei Gevurah. It's just saying the same person who now is let's say a chesedic person comes back and hears the teacher. He says, I could see also the Gevurah perspective.
Because he went out of himself, right?
Right. That's what he's saying. That's right. We have to see where he's leading to. That means that Shammai, who's the Klei gevurah, can now have Eira Chesed, because he went back to hear it from the source. Because the Svara doesn't yet have a direction. That's why we find at times that Beis Shammai, even though they prohibit the machmirim, they're usually more stringent, that they're makel, they're more lenient. If they come, since they come from the level of gevurah, they should always be machmir. Where do they suddenly get this exception, this rule, this exception? They suddenly are makel. Right? This versatility. Yeah, the reason for it is that this is the inyan, this is the meaning, that the Eira Chesed is now exchanged to be in a container of gevurah. Meaning, the container of Shammai, which is usually gevurah, is now containing an Eira Chesed and therefore being lenient. Like there's no the Daled Pashas in Tefillin. Yeah. The Daled Pashas in Tefillin are the three Meichen, the three minds. What are they? The higher ones, Chachma Bina, and the Chesed and Gevurah. It's Meichen of Midas, basically. Meichen of Chesed.
That's why Das splits to chesed.
Yeah. L'cheri Yifla. Eichen Cheshav Chesed Gevurah Shem Midas B'chinas Meichen. And seemingly it's surprising. How can you count suddenly two emotions, chesed and gevurah, they're midas, emotions, and count them into the form intellect and cognitive? However, the case is like this. The explanation is canal, like we explained before. Chesed and gevurah shenachshav lemidas hainu k'she'eres b'kelim shel chesed and gevurah. When we say chesed and gevurah are considered to be emotions, that's when their energies are in containers of chesed and gevurah. Shesham hem mischalkim is chesed or gevurah idei mezig achlifu canal, a keli canal. There, in their containers, they distinguished and they're distinct. They separate. This one's chesed, this is gevurah through the temperament of the container. But the energies don't yet have a distinction, a division between chesed and gevurah. Like an example of Shammai and Hillel, shemischalkim liyis chesed gevurah b'kelim shalom canal v'lei be'eres. That Shammai and Hillel are divided by their containers, not by their energies. Their energy, they can always assume the other energy. This is obviously going to be. He's going to obviously qualify this because this is a different. This is not what he said in the beginning. In the beginning, he proved from achlifu duchtayu the opposite. Yeah. How could Eida chesed go into klei gevurah? There's no achlifu. You can't call it an exchange because they never had that personality. Here he's saying they don't have the personality, but this is the way it's explained elsewhere. But basically, when they return back, so they go beyond the container, they can suddenly see the other perspective. The other perspective is the perspective of chesed. And that's why you could say the meichen, you're talking about the meichen, how could it be the meichen midas? Talking about the eris of the midas. The kelim of the midas, chesed and gevurah. The eris are not yet like Shammai and Hillel. The eris is still how it is in the mashpia. It's interesting, he doesn't bring das. He insists on calling it, because he's talking how, because ultimately, okay, because chesed and gevurah is Shammai. An example, chesed and gevurah is Shammai and Hillel receiving from the meichen of Shemaya and Avtalyon, their eir. Yeah. Nevertheless, it's understood that also the intelligence, also the mind, also the mind of the teacher, it's at least the source of chesed and gevurah, meaning the leniency or the harshness, the stringency. That he has within him.
Now he's gone back.
Concealed chesed and gevurah. But it's shapeless or seamless or substanceless compared, again relative, compared to the seichel v'hasagas hamakablim. It's in a state of amorphous state compared to the way the seichel is understood and the comprehension within the recipients, because by them, chesed gevurah actually has a difference. They actually are different. Shammai, gevurah, chesed, oiser, Hillel, chesed, mekilin. V'kumay b'derech prat. B'derech prat? Yeah. B'dal pashas, right? My mistake. You're right. V'kumay b'dal pashas, that film. Like in the 4 chapters of the 4 pashas of film that he mentioned, the Dal pashas. Ayin Beis meichen chesed gevurah, the last 2 intellects called chesed gevurah. Ima yesem meichen hariyam b'chinas chesed gevurah kapara. Even though they're meichen, they still are called chesed gevurah. They still have within them at least some form of chesed and gevurah. V'kamavur b'makam achas shezeh b'chinas hadas.
He introduced it.
Shoy hatiyah l'chesed gevurah. Like it says elsewhere, this is the level of das that leans toward chesed and gevurah. Das gives birth to the emotions. V'nimtza shegam b'chinas hapshitus ein b'chinas pshitus mamash. Back to the mamash. So we find from this. This is very interesting. We find from this pshitus, even in Shemaya and Avtalyon, you can't call pshitus mamash. You can't call it total lack.
The spot of the Rav. The spot of the Rav.
Yeah, the spot of the Rav. The teacher cannot call it pshitus mamash. Total lack of shape, form, identity. Even though this is what allows for there to be an exchange of roles. In other words, if chesed and gevurah was solid inside the mind of the teacher, how could Shammai and Hillel hear differently? If the teacher says it's usher, and it's clearly that there's a gevurah, then they both would hear that. So the teacher is saying something, they both can hear it, they understand, but there has to be something there that they both can use to lean toward their direction. So it has both elements. Okay, this is in the interface is gewaldic step. You know why? Because it allows both things again. If he was just solid in his position, you don't have diversity. If he was completely pshittis, then you don't have. You could say, okay, it's like nothing to do with the teacher. These two just came up with their thing based on, there's no relationship. Someone could say, did you really take it from the teacher or is it your own chiddush? And Shammai and Hillel would both tell you, I heard it from him. They won't say, I made up a new idea, because it's what they heard.
So it must be coming from the teacher.
It's very much like Kol Masha Talmud was Chadish, everything a student is Mechadish, is L'meish Messina. So the question is asked, what's the Chiddush? It's not a Chiddush. The answer is because it was a klal. And taking out the prat is the Chiddush. Not everyone will extract it the same way. The same person could hear Moshe Rabbeinu speak. This one will learn, take the same pasuk. This one learns from it like this. This one says the opposite. Then someone comes and says, it's a third thing. And someone says, it's not applicable here. It's the whole Gemara process. It's again another example of relative amorphousness. Like you have your tangible chesed and gevurah, tangible apple. Then you get to Shemaya and Avtalyon is a little more abstract, but you can identify it somewhere. Instead, now of course the big question later is going to be, how does Shemaya and Avtalyon connect to those before that? So it doesn't. But this, I think something. With seichel, you can probably climb many more layers than with the apple, for example. Yeah. Because the apple, at some point, it's not an apple anymore, it's hard to abstract. But with seichel, you can start off and say, okay, seichel of a psak din. You say, here's the svara that it came from. And you could take the svara of the svara. You could create probably a whole bunch of levels. Right, the mashal. But also you can take an idea and see how an idea has evolved from previous ideas that are very, very fascinating. We see the example actually, when a baby, I mentioned this, a baby develops in the fetus. The fetus develops the embryo for 9 months. If you look at those pictures, today they have mamish from the moment of, it's miracle, the miracle is unbelievable. Push a seed. You look at the seed and there's nothing. But it has all the potential. You cut open the seed, the Maimer Yema Sheni from the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, and Yema Sheni Tafresh Pehei, and the Maimonic continuation says that you put it under a microscope, you actually use a microscope, you can detect certain things, but you're never gonna, if you didn't know that this can grow into this, look at me and you in the mirror, you'd never see that in no seeds, But it has it all there. So what state is it there? And then you see it develop and develop. And I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about the mind of a person, the emotions. I'm not just talking about the body. A heart, the complexity of a brain developing. So you have examples of this type of the same entity as it's in a much pure or. And then of course you have all the levels of.
Even more. The seed in the brain is even more fun.
Yeah. Okay. So bottom line is that you have to say there's something in there. But at the same time, you could have a achlifu duchtayu, so it's not defined completely. Like the kudus hachachme. Kudus hachachme ein befrat el masha bechlal. You cannot. Bina cannot conceive of no ideas if it's following that chacham. But within chachme, it allows for different approaches. That's the Ayin Beis. Okay. V'hamuvin mizeh u'gimel inyanim. Conclusion of this, what we understand from this is three things. I'm glad he sums it up. Three things. Aleph. The first thing is that it is the chesed gevurah kashem ba'kelim shalahem, that the energies of chesed gevurah, when they're in their containers, harayim b'chinas chesed gevurah mamash. First thing we understand is that chesed gevurah, love and discipline, or in this case, leniency and stringency, when they're in their containers, they're mamash. They're actually chesed and gevurah. Like the idea, when it's in the comprehension of Hillel and Shammai, it's literally chesed and gevurah. The Vasogas Hillel had a chesed. In the understanding of Hillel, the idea that he heard from the teacher is mechayeves, it compels chesed, to lenient, to leheper Vasogas Shammai.
Obligates.
Mechayeves obligates or compels. Mechayeves means more than obligate. Mechayeves in Torah, mitzvah b'chiva mitzvahs, but here it's a seichel, mechayev, another seichel is more like it compels it. It's mechayev. It necessitates it. So definitely there. Well, a heper b'asogas Shammai, and the opposite in the understanding of Shammai, that it leads to gevurah. Harashayerish and b'chinas chesed gevurah mamash. Oh, the Eidus and the Kelim, that's what he means. So the Eidus, the chesed, because we read again, the Eidus, the chesed gevurah kashem ba'kelim, they're mamash chesed and gevurah. The Eidus. So we see from this is Harashayerish and b'chinas chesed gevurah mamash. The ein zeh kamei moshel hamayim shemishtanim lefi gevurah kelim. That's not like the example given that water changes. This goes back to Mayim Rekiah, actually. Water changes according to the color, the tint of the container. Shagam be'esh shehem b'teicha keli v'nidim lefi gevurah keli. Because water, when it's inside the container, and you see it, you look at it through the container, you see a color. They appear needed. They appear according to the color of the container. They're fundamentally colorless. So it's not like mine. Hari Avalkan by Shammai and Hillel, the Eidus Avalkan, but here Hari Asvara Kishiba Asogas Hillel Hari Mechayev Rak Chesed. The Svara, the thought as it's inside of Hillel, the comprehension, it's Mechayev compels Chesed, only Chesed. The loy gevurah and not gevurah. The chen leheper b'asogas Shammai, and saying the opposite in the comprehension of Shammai. Well, one second. Interestingly, he's not talking the Eidus in Shemaya and Avtalyon, by the way. He's talking the Eid in Shammai and Hillel. One's the Eidus on Kelim.
Yeah.
Not when they return back to the teacher.
Yeah, the first time.
So,
it's not a raya, I don't know, I've never seen.
one second. So, in the beginning of the page, the top of the page, it
Why
says,
can't I say it's like the B'shtan lefi gevurah kelim? So the Eidus and the Kelim of B'shamai, and then it becomes a gevurah. No? It can't be, because I heard it from the same Rav. It's back to...
right, they heard it from the same Rav. And remember, it's not just a Keli.
So why would this Eid and Shammai be changed if it's... Yeah. That's the proof.
Because the proof is because it means in the source it had to have a shadish of it, and that's what he heard.
Yeah, I also want to...
We'll go over it again, but let's just continue. Here you go. Because the reason for this, and this means, because the reason for the chesed gevurah and the Eidus of Shammai and Hillel, and their energy, it's not just because of the containers alone. Because of the source and the root of the energy within the teacher. Like the chesed gevurah and the svara and the thought compared to Shammai and Hillel. The reason that they're able to derive chesed and gevurah is because in the seichel, the svara, in the content, in the thought of the teacher, there was already concealed chesed and gevurah. And even though within them, Shammai and Hillel, in other words, chesed and gevurah became an actual existence, Whereas in their teacher, it was still amorphous, it was still potential and hidden. Because since Shammai's understanding is gevurah, that's why he understands it l'chumra. He grasps the idea l'chumra for stringency. The Hillel and Hillel, being that his comprehension fundamentally is love, is chesed, a kindness, alkenu b'tefes laheta. That's why he grasped that. Makol malkein. Knows he's saying, even though the tangible chesed and gevurah happened only by the students, nevertheless, if the original idea itself did not have, they could not be a distinction, a separation in their ideas that actually defines it as chesed and gevurah.
It's still lacking a little bit. That's why it continues, I think.
Well, the same thing. And even though the same thing that from that is through the containers that they become chesed gevurah. The reason for this is because in the source, in the root, it has chesed gevurah in concealed form. And that's why it causes it to be, there's an actual energy called chesed, an actual energy called gevurah. 1 second. Okay. There's, I think, one critical point you have to understand here. I think it goes back to what I said earlier. If you talk to Shammai and Hillel, they're going to trace their idea to their teacher. They're going to say, I heard. They're not going to say, I heard a general idea and it could have been either way. And I happened, because being my personality, chose the chesed approach. This one, gevurah. Each one are going to say, they're going to say what he said, what the teacher said was conclusion. Mechayev chesed. This one's mechayev gevurah. That's a key distinction. It would be different if we both sat at a teacher, we go away, and you say, you know what he said could have been gone either way. I happen to choose because my personality is that way. That's, I think, a critical component here. That the seichel is coming from the mashpia here. Because if not, then if there's no transmission, then of course Shammai, by personality, chooses more strict. Let's say they didn't hear from Shemaya and Avtalyon. They're learning something on their own. He leans always this way. That says has a personality like that. And see, here's the key thing: is the source. It's not just what they are, and that's what because the air that was transmitted, which did not have kalim yet. Remember, Shemaya and Avtalyon for sure. There's no kalim. There's air. I mean, there's their kalim, but forget about it. Their kalim don't have yet. They're transmitting an idea. That idea, he's basically saying, because they take a conclusion out of that and they trace it to that, you have to say that the idea. So it's true that two things happen. In addition, once they hear the idea, two things have to happen. The containers that they have, their personalities, are the ones that cause it. But the air had to get it from the air that came from there. That's what he's saying. So it's not just their personalities. The air itself, the seichel itself, has to have in it the ability to explain it that way. But there, it still has it in the state of, like he said, it's not pshittus mamish. That's what you have to say that. Because if their seichel, I go back, if their seichel was so separate, so detached from the conclusions of chesed and gevurah, then it's a whole different type of discussion. He's not saying that. He's not saying they heard from Shemaya and Avtalyon, like I said, there's a God. Now, how do you approach God? One says gevurah, one says chesed. You have to say there's talking more a specific type of idea that could be seen as a chesed and a gevurah, and when so that's how they take it. Now he's going to achlifu duchtayu, but because look, this needs good thinking, but I think that's what it comes down to. Because for sure he's talking about the integrity. They're keeping integrity to their teacher. There's no question that that's critical here. He's not even saying it. I think it's a given. Because if they're wandering away from their teacher, then you could say there's nothing to do with Shemaya and Avtalyon. It's like somebody hearing a teacher say something. Let's say they did say chesed, and you go away and you say, you know what, I heard gevurah. When in truth the teacher, this happens. We're not talking about people like that. We're talking about people who know how to listen. I can tell you right now, I remember Fabrengens, the Rebbe said something, and we would disagree by Chazara, and opposites sometimes, literally opposites. You can't say chesed and gevurah like, chumrah. that the Rebbe said it's allowed, and someone else said I heard that it's not allowed. But it was a svara that when you really started breaking it down, there were different ways of answering. Sometimes answers were very, very different. I remember times real contradictions. And I went back trying to understand, and I realized the Rebbe said no way. And I once asked the Rebbe something, and I wrote with some people like this and some people like that. The Rebbe answered, "Yesh eid gimel dal defan." So I realized that the Rebbe said an idea, and he was specifically didn't spell it out. So he's saying basically you all can correctly take. I mean, I'll give you an example. I think a good example, excellent example. It's very relevant to the whole Mashiach issues. I always say this. People say, I read in the Sikha, this is what you have to do. Someone says, read the same Sikha. No, that's not what you're supposed to do. And everyone says, so what's it? What does the Rebbe say? So I give an example. You go on Mivtzayim. You speak to, let's say, someone about putting on film. Nashik. Doesn't matter. You speak to everybody the same way? No. Unless you're an idiot. You speak to people. This one says, some people, you have to explain it. Some people, it's emotional. Some people say, listen, crisis in Israel, we're uniting. There's all kinds of ways. Even you, one person, will speak 100 different ways to 100 different people, let alone 2 different people. Now, the Rebbe said, go out there and be mashpia. And do it with love, kind. So unless you're doing something also with the Rebbe, you're alienating somebody, or you're doing something that you're not allowed to do, or you're not doing it, in the ways, you could say, there's a lot of ways to do it. And one guy, in Israeli style, they'll slap the guy in a mitzvah tank. In American style, you don't do that so fast. So what's going on? The person who has the personality that is more gevurah, they can schlep someone, let's say. Another person who's, let's say, does it more leniently or mellow. Speaks mellow. They both, which one is the Rebbe? The Rebbe didn't say it this way. But in his methods, he said, whatever it takes, so to speak. I'm just giving you an example. So you have to say that both approaches, again, the approaches are within the context of Shammai and Hillel has to be within the parameters of halachic interpretation. But within the parameters, you have an approach from the Rav. In the Rav, it's still amorphous. Remember, you yourself can learn from another person. Maybe I should schlep someone on, even though your personality is not to be so aggressive, and vice versa. So you have an example of, you could hear an idea, go ahead and do it, and it could be, your kalim are the ones that really define how you do it. That's your personality. But to say that it's not in the aid, that the aid is completely neutral, is also not correct. That's, I gave an example. I don't know if it's a perfect example, but it's an example at least. It's definitely what he's trying to say here. I mean, I would love to find an example actually in a limud from Shammai and Hillel, and look what they heard from Shemaya and Avtalyon. That would be the best.
Yeah. To
take what Shemaya and Avtalyon said and how they took a chesed and gevurah. That would be maybe you can do that. I mean, Shemaya and Avtalyon you don't have a lot of members from them. You haven't picked the others. But that would be very interesting, because if you could do that, you could push a show. The example is brilliant because they're tracing it to there, you see. And if someone asks the Rebbe, so tell me, should I do it by aggressively gevurah or through chesed? The Rebbe will say, lefi hamatzav. So you judge, you determine, or lefi ha'adam. And he's not going to tell you which one, because the idea lends itself to both. And when you do one, it's like another example may be hakel helachachar apisa, by chalemes, by dreams. Oviv shomer sadav, the Gemara says. So the dream can be interpreted both ways, and if you interpret this way, you mechayev it. But it is taken from the dream. The dream is still in a state of. In quantum, it's for sure. This is very quantum-like, because in quantum science mechanics, a light can be particle away, and when you actually measure it, you define it. So in other words, there are things that are called state of probability. Think of it almost like, today they say that children, all at conception, everyone's a female. And a little later, a stage where another chromosome gets in and becomes the male. It's interesting. Maybe it's skin with chavas, aim kol chai, But the point, But the point I'm making here is that you could argue that there's a state where something can go either way. And it's due to another factor that it brings it this way. But you can't say that was not there before. That's the key. You're not talking about a state that is completely amorphous, where it's absolutely neutral. You're talking about a nucleus. The muscle, let's say an example I mentioned before, a seed. You plant a seed, let's say an apple tree. There's no way this is turning into an orange tree. But in the apple tree itself, it can go this way, it can go that way. That's, and I'm not, I don't know the biology, the what's it called?
It's not this. It's not like a muscle actually for ain't safe. Because the seed becomes an apple tree and it becomes an apple tree and bud, but only an apple tree.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Like Insiflas Pashtusa.
Right, except for Chachma,
Yeah,
it's within
exactly.
the parameters of
That is
Chachma.
a good example. Anyway, let's go on here. Still the first thing that we concluded, there's two other things. And nevertheless, there can be exchange of roles. Shammai and Hillel. Like Rabbi Shammai, even though that the svaras, their thoughts are in chesed gevurah mamash, they're literally chesed and gevurah, lenient or strict, stringent. Nevertheless, they can exchange because in their source there's still a certain shapelessness, though it has something there. You can't say pshitus mamash. You say it has some measure of pshitus there. I'm thinking if you could use the example of a parent. Sometimes you're like, my children used to say, they were kids, we overheard them speaking. They wanted something, so they said, if Tati says maybe, it means no. If Mommy says maybe, it means yes. Is that always like that? So I'm thinking
I think I put that also.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, it's a masculine, feminine thing.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe when a child comes to you for something, and you say maybe, and I don't mean you're pushing it off, because it's not definite in your mind yet, which way. If it's completely not acceptable, you'd say no. Completely fine, you'd say yes, whatever reason it's maybe. And then the maybe changes based on the child is a little nicer, or you have your softest heart, whatever it is. So if your personality kicks in, and maybe you're more gevurah and say no. If your personality is more chesed, you say yes. Later. Initially you said maybe because it's I'm not sure yet. But you could have achlifu duchtayu also. You could also go the other way. I'm just trying to think if that's an example where something could be originally, and I mean a real maybe, I mean a maybe where you drink a cup. You really look, we'll see.
You haven't formulated your opinion yet,
Yeah, but I'm trying to say, but the maybe includes both possibilities. Just thinking if it's an example, and the first time they come to you, you say no, and then they come back again, and you say yes, because whatever, they're nesachen by you, they were able to touch you. Anyway, I thought maybe it's an example. Okay. Now goes Ayin Beis. Remember, these are three conclusions. Second conclusion, the second thing we learn from all this is Ayin Beis, that the exchange of roles happens only on the level of the energies, not on the containers. Because the essentially their container of understanding does not change at all. The Shammai klei hasagasa b'chinas gevurah, Rabbi Hillel b'chinas chesed. Because the container of Shammai is always gevurah. It's not like suddenly his personality changed. And Rabbi Hillel, his personality is chesed. Raksha svaras mischalfin. This also, I think, adds to what I said. You see, the svara is the key thing here. The keli is the personality. The svara is the logic, is the idea, the eir. See, that's a key thing, because if you think the svara is the keli, then you got a problem. So, okay, so their personality. Raksha svaras mischalfin. Their ideas, the theory or the concept, changed. Shazeo eir, avla keli enim mishtanis. That's the energy. The eir, the light, is the svara. Avla keli, the container enim mishtanis. Shagam beisha hasogas hasvara hi lechesed. Because even while he's understanding it like chesed, lenient, gam Shammai gabi Shammai kol metzem klei hasagasa b'chinas gevurah. Even while he's lenient there, he's still a gevurah person. He's still a personality of gevurah.
So how did he become lenient?
Well, you're asking. Well, let's see.
Yeah,
In parentheses, like Yochelias, Shazel al dei skalos b'chinas chesed v'gevurah. You could say that this is through the iskalos, the interconnectivity between chesed and gevurah. Lakein hasogi b'chinas chesed. See, this is not achlifu duchtayu. Okay, once again, let me just go through this. Therefore, his asogis can also be chesed. In other words, even his gevurah has also chesed within it. Yes, okay. I think I have the understanding. One second. We made that the gam chesed shebegvurah, b'chinas gevurah v'chein gevurah shebechesed b'chinas chesed. But it's known that even chesed shebegvurah is still gevurah, and gevurah shebechesed is still chesed. Is chesed. You know what he's saying? His scholars that I mentioned doesn't create a change. Scholars means it could create. If Shammai did not have, if there was no scholars, it's a new. He's adding a new thing here. Besides the fact that Shemaya and Avtalyon, the teacher's idea, had the potential of both chesed and gevurah, questions about Shammai now. Shammai has a container, a personality of gevurah. The idea that they contain has the possibility of chesed, so he can go back and hear it another way. But why would he hear it another way? Why doesn't his personality dominate? Because the spheres themselves have scholars. Even his gevurah has a chesed in it. So even his personality has an element of chesed in it. You see what I'm saying?
It's the kelim, not the spheres.
Right. It's the potential to be changed.
Whether the scholars comes from the eris or the kelim is not so relevant here, because either way, it's just an additional part of the equation. Let's say the kelim do. You could even say the kelim do. Even a keli of gevurah has, because you're talking about scholar, remember tikkun, tikun, kedusha. Even a keli of gevurah has also element of potential. It's still, he says clearly, it's chesed shebegvurah. It still remains gevurah. In other words, even when let's put it this way, when Shammai is being lenient, what's happening here? Did he suddenly break his nature and become a lenient person? For sure not. He's still gevurah. This situation he determined is lenient. Why did he determine it? Because his gevurah is not just this absolute gevurah. His gevurah also allows for a chesed shebegvurah. In gevurah, there's also possibly a chesed. Now, if there was no chesed in the root, in the teacher, it wouldn't emerge just because he has. On the other hand, if the teacher has chesed and he doesn't have any room for it, he would always be strict. So it's in both directions. That's how I would explain this parenthesis.
The air changed. The air changed. This one, right? So how does Shammai receive it if the air changed? He's a ishachad gevurah. If the air changed, I say the chesed.
No, but how did no? That wouldn't change. It didn't change on its own. It changed because he allowed it to change. He went back and heard it again.
Ayin Beis, not Ayin Beis. He's a gevurah, so how does he receive it? The chesed, because within gevurah there's a chesed shel gevurah.
Okay.
So he has room for that to receive it. The kelim remained. He has a component, a factor within the gevurah.
Okay, fine. Now, I was talking more personally. The fact is that he now has taken a situation and has been lenient, very deliberately.
Because the air changed.
There's no magic here. It's because he received it differently.
No, Ayin Beis is chalpus to rak ba'eres.
What does that mean?
Like by kelim.
Eris is not b'chira here. They're talking about the eris that are coming into Shammai. What do you mean the air changed? It's because Shammai is now accessing this chiluf of eris. Okay, it's semantics, but it comes down to that. Yes, schaf is from the eris. We agree. Schaf is not coming from the containers. No.
The first one was the chalpus.
No. He didn't say that. There's no difference. The first of the statement is that eris have in them, they're not pshitus mamish, they have chesed and gevurah. That's the first. His chalfus comes on the level of eris, not on the level of kelim. That's number two. The personalities do not change of the people. What changes is their specific application right now. And that's a result that the has the ability to be mischalef. And he's adding the parentheses that the container also, or you could put this, it's also because there's this skalus of chesed and gevurah. I'm trying to say is like this. Just the mere fact that is able to be mischalef because it's not so defined, it's not solid, is not enough. You have to also say that they also have a skalus among them. There is chesed within gevurah and gevurah within chesed. That's really what it comes down to. It's not so much about kelim and eris here. So we find from this that the chil of the exchange is only in the energies. Even though they're chesed gevurah mamish, even though they're chesed gevurah mamish, they have within them literally chesed gevurah, like we spoke earlier. Nevertheless, because they're still amorphous compared to the containers, therefore they can exchange. Aval kelim shem b'chinas chesed gevurah b'metzias mamish. That's what he has. The metzias mamish. Chesed gevurah that are chesed gevurah in actual metzias. This is their personality. Einam mishtanim u'mischalfim. They do not change and do not exchange. V'agimel, and the third conclusion, the third thing we learn from this is shesibas achlifu v'ayidei harav. That the cause for the exchange is the teacher. In other words, they're receiving it from their source. Yeah, that's critical because I go back to what is that? If they were left to their own recourse, this one's always chesed, this one's always gevurah. So it's their connection to their source that creates this shift and change. What does he say? Like we discussed. The thought of the teacher also has within it concealed chesed and gevurah. Nevertheless, they're in amorphous compared to the recipients. To the extent that behem in them and through them can be this exchange. You have to say this comes from the pshitus part, the amorphous dimension. That this specifically is what causes the exchange. Because why would it exchange? If this is a chesed, this is solid chesed, this is solid gevurah, where's there room for change? He's giving a profound understanding of how energy is both. It's not a solid, and it's not a gas. It's like a liquid.
It's fluid.
It's fluid. Yeah. Even though it has within it chesed and gevurah, leniency and stringency concealed, nevertheless, it's in a form of amorphous. But such amorphousness that it can allow that it's possible that this should bring to an exchange of ideas where the chesed becomes the keli of chesed has eira gevurah and the keli gevurah has eira chesed. So from this we know we derive that this pshitis is not total shapelessness, but nevertheless it's still pshitis. It's still somewhat amorphous. To the point that it can, through this, can be the exchange of roles. So now, in addition to what he said in the previous chapter, is levadzes. Levad kolan now, he added this whole thing now that energy itself has within its shape. So with chapter 12, the focus was more because it enters into containers. That's why it has shape. So it has to enter the container and works together with the container, and the container causes it to have shape and limitations. But there was more the limitation that is chesed and not gevurah, or like not ein sof. It doesn't extend forever. Here he went much deeper. The shape and the energy now is a real shape, more than just limited by the containers. Till chapter 13, you could have said, you know what? Okay, the containers affect the air. The air has something, you have to say some defined, but to what extent? Here he's made the case that air has more chesed and gevurah than we would have taken from chapter 12, but it's still pshitis, which of course it retains its fundamental property, which is that it's transcendent. But it's not a transcendence without tziyud. This is, this was, going back to another Varaviu. You see, if you have to go out of your whole personality to connect to God, that means annihilating your existence. If you can find in transcendence, in other words, not just water goes into color-tinted glass, but if you find in the transcendence itself, which is air, shapes of chesed and gevurah, but it retains its amorphousness. You have a way to move. You have a way to move from a parameter structure of kev and containers to a more transcendent state, because the transcendence itself is not just okay. We're all consumed by higher light. It's different. It's measured. It has personality to it. In other words, when a person gets transcendent, if you are a chesedic person, it'll be a different type of transcendence than a gevurah person. Just trying to say transcendence, which is air, which really relieves the pressure and the tension of the containers, because it could maintain it, be a container, join the air to a higher state of bittul. That's what the conclusion of this. So let's read the kitzur. This has been a long one with the whole introduction. Kitzur gam masha amar achlifu duchtayu, and also from what it says, the exchange of roles, moving, what he brings the Zohar and the Shmelach from the Arizal. Move on from this thing, the roles. It's also from this. Also, we understand. Moving, we understand. Sheyesh b'chinas chesed gevurah by eris. We understand that this chesed gevurah in the energy level, in the energies. V'uval derech moshel Shammai and Hillel shekiblu sfara achas. That's an example is from Shammai and Hillel, the two sages that received one svara, one idea. U'mischalek is b'chinas chesed gevurah, kliyas agosu, and broke down and separated in their container of their minds, of their understanding, comprehension, into chesed and gevurah. When they hear the same idea again from the teacher, it's possible that their idea, their concept should be exchanged, because of the pshitas, the amorphousness of the teacher's mind, idea. And nevertheless, there, in the teacher's mind, that's where is the source for their chesed and gevurah. Their strictness and their leniency and strictness is rooted in the teacher's mind. And the chesed and gevurah is an actual svara. It's not something that came later. It's in the air, because the hidden, the chesed gevurah that's concealed is the cause for the chesed gevurah that, as they separate in Shammai and Hillel. And the same thing as the exchange that takes place is also within these ideas.
That's the second. That's the base. That's in a base.
Didn't really say base. Okay. Yeah. That's because of the pshittus of the mocker.
Because in the beginning it says half so like by Eris, or here it says best brothers.
Right. Yeah.
He's explaining what the Eris is.
Yeah. But only in the svara, not in the kelim of the people. So there's chesed gevurah, but they're in a level of pshittus, and because of that, there is the exchange. He doesn't mention the third thing. Okay, because the real focus is both that but main one line focus of this is it has in it some chesed gevurah, but it still maintains pshittus. So we have another filling in of the interface level, what the level of air is, how air has both dimensions. So we finished chapter 13, and we did today pages 20 through 22.